So you may have clicked on this video because the thumbnail has me holding a fly swatter, a drill, and a gun. So I'm hoping that'll make sense by the end of this video. So what I'm going to talk about today is autonomy. And autonomy is important to you whether you realize it or not. Now, what is autonomy? Well, it's basically your ability to govern yourself, or put more simply, to make your own decisions. And this is true in your life, it's true at an organizational level, and it's even true at a government level. And when I say a government level, I basically mean entire societies here. So why is autonomy important? Well, it dictates a lot of how you make decisions or if you make decisions. And one way I can explain autonomy to you is when you were a kid, you probably didn't have a lot of autonomy. In fact, if you're watching this video, it's also very possible that you don't currently have a lot of autonomy. And this can be seen with your parents, that basically a lot of how you do things or what you do or the decisions you make or just little things you do, like when you go to bed when you're a kid, you do not have the autonomy to make the decision to do them in one way or another. Your parents do that for you. They are basically the authoritative figure that handles those autonomous tasks for you. I believe that's a nice way of putting it. Now, if you are a kid, you might be familiar with the fact that when you want to make a decision and you're not allowed to, that generally doesn't make you very happy. So autonomy actually is a lot more in society, but I want to start at the organizational level. So you might think this is simple. An organization like a company, for instance, has a big guy at the top that decides this is what we do and everybody else simply carries out those orders. Well, it turns out that that doesn't work very well, and you can easily see it, especially if you've worked or been a part of different organizations. And this can range all the way from people being very happy and passionate doing what they're doing, feeling that they're almost doing it of their own volition, all the way down to the person being really upset and quitting because they feel like they have no place in the organization or that the organization is dumb. Now, this can happen in a lot of ways, but in general, we're talking about power here. That when you're an employee at a company, especially if you are a more technical person or a person that's put there to actually be able to make your own decisions, like in management, you might get upset if you're ignored, if you have good ideas and they are not listened to. But then beyond that, you'll probably get really upset if the company ignores what you were telling them advice-wise, and then bad things come of it, maybe exactly the things that you warned them would. And this is something that we have to think about when it comes to organizations and even larger structures, that when somebody is voicing their opinion, they generally aren't doing it just so that they look good or they get their way. Like, a child, they are more comfortable with this, so that's what they push for. While that can be the case, they're generally doing it for the larger success of the group. And if these people aren't happy with the responses that they get, they may not immediately quit and leave, although that does happen and that is very costly. There are other consequences. It's sort of like a chink in the armor, or just a wound, like maybe as small as a paper cut or a gash or even a broken bone. That how severe it is depends on how that person's going to think moving forward. And so as an example, if I make a suggestion to do something a certain way in a program, and we decide not to go that way, but it's clear to me that I was listened to and I was giving reasoning as to why that decision was made to not go that direction, it might be a little paper cut that I will think about for a few seconds, maybe a minute, and then I won't think of it much more. But if I have an idea I put a lot of thought into, a lot of work into, and nobody even listens, nobody even really considers it, and we move forward, and of course, things happen after that, maybe some of those which could have been avoided, that's going to be more like a big cut or a broken bone. And that's something that I'm not going to forget very quickly. I'm going to think about for a lot longer because it hurt a lot more. And that makes it much more meaningful. Now, you can see this in companies with people that have become sort of disillusioned with management, that when they talk about management, they might speak poorly of them. They might speak of them as though they are a thing to be avoided or left out of equations when it comes to getting things done. And that is a way of people taking their own autonomy from the company, basically saying, I'm going to do what I want, whether you want me to or not. So if you're a company, especially if you're a person watching this and you're thinking about going into management, this is a really bad thing because you lose a lot when you can't even see it in these cases. When the wound is small and understandable, then that is just a necessary evil. But when it's bigger than that, you may not actually have much of an indicator, especially at first. This person will just go from thinking, I like working for this company, I'm doing the right thing in the world, I am into this, to thinking more along the lines of, you know, I come here to get the paycheck. And the way things work here aren't always right, or maybe aren't mostly right, but I need my paycheck, I'm just gonna play my role and keep going. Now, this is almost invisible, especially if you're in management, because people are not gonna tell you to your face. But the truth is, you've now taken somebody who might spend some of their spare time thinking of cool new ideas, cool ways to move forward, and turn them into more of a drone. And that person that's now a drone may only do just as much as they need to do to not get fired. So that's a bad situation if you're in a company. And that's why companies that give autonomy, or I should say allow autonomy for their employees, do really well. I was watching a video about Spotify and how they have gone out of their way to allow autonomy as much as possible and actually set up structures to make autonomy the default. And let me give you an example. When you're autonomous as a person, you tend to just do what you want to. You might think in an organization, how can that possibly work? If everybody just goes their own way and does what they want, well, wouldn't Apple end up selling hamburgers? And no, they absolutely won't. That's one problem that we have with a lot of these types of agile methodologies, that it requires that you have a level of trust in people. Now, you may have had bad experiences in your life that make you not want to trust people, especially groups of people. But the thing is, especially if you're working in an organization, you actually have a way to screen those people as they come in. And if you're working in a more technical area, you have already like a good stock of people at your disposal here. These are not just random people you pulled off the street and asked to work together. These are some of the brighter people in our society. So people, when they're given autonomy or allowed to have autonomy, basically don't just go crazy with it. They know that they are a part of a bigger thing and they understand what that bigger thing is. The other thing they tend to do is they tend to form autonomous groups. And that means they know their abilities to do what they want to do is a little limited by the fact that they're just one person. So they tend to find other people that are also working autonomously and form these autonomous groups. And that means to say they find people that have the same goals and they move with that. So Apple might end up with some kind of different products if they embrace this idea. They may have smaller groups of people come up with ideas. Here's the cool thing about ideas though. They sometimes fail, and that's okay. And we know it's okay because even in the old way of doing things, these ideas at many times fail. The good thing if you let these smaller groups come up with these ideas is that they are going to be more passionate about making the idea work. It's now not just about, are they going to get their paycheck at the end of the day and just working long enough to say they did 40 hours a week. It's now about something that they wanted to do, something that they have in their mind, that they want to see be a reality. And they are more using you as a resource, as a company, to accomplish their goals as an intellectual. And that's all good, because what they come up with may be that next big thing, and the company will still mostly profit. So aside from companies, this is something that you need to think about as an individual, and that is to say, you can limit your own autonomy as an individual. How we do that is largely shaped by our childhood and upbringing, but it can very much limit you, especially if you're going into some kind of technical career. Now, a lot of times you'll hear this stated as a lack of imagination, that you have a lack of imagination, or that you need more imagination in your process. Now, the problem with the word imagination is when we hear it, we tend to think of when we were kids and we pretended to be Darth Vader. And that's really not what is meant by this, but still the word has a stigma attached to it. What they really mean is your autonomy a lot of times. Now, these two things are not actually one and the same. A lot of people who are kind of said to be unimaginative really have very vivid imaginations, but they don't have the personal autonomy to carry any of it forward, especially when it's called imagination, because that almost makes it sound like the things you're thinking of are stupid things a kid would think of and that people wouldn't accept them. So when you're lacking in autonomy, that means that you do have these ideas, and most people do, and you simply don't feel like you have the ability to make the decision to make it a reality. And this can be so severe that you never even speak about it. It can also be just severe enough to where you bring it up but won't get involved with it or won't push it forward. And at worst, this can lead to somebody else taking your idea and making it their own, which can be a really, really bad feeling. So as an individual, you need to exercise this autonomy. And this can be best done in your life at first. And that is to say, when you want to do something and you can't find any glaring bad reasons to not do it, you basically decide to do it and you go as far as you want to go. What limits your autonomy a lot of times is fear. And it can be fear of a few things. One of those big things is you're afraid somebody else is going to stop you. And if when you were young, you had people stop you a lot, this is probably going to be a bigger problem for you. But you can still overcome this by simply putting your mind to something, you think of something, and simply pursuing it. Sometimes what you're afraid of is committing to anything. And the thing to remember is you don't have to commit to anything to be autonomous. You can go 2% of the way into something and decide it's stupid and throw it away. That's the point of being autonomous, is that you're making these decisions one at a time at a granular level. And granular decision making is one thing that makes us stronger as a society, because a person up in the government on Mount Olympus can't really well make decisions for me. They can't see my life. They can't see the obstacles. That can also go the same for somebody at the top of an organization or company, because although they may have an idea of what they want the company to do, they can't really see the struggle going on the ground. This is where they need people to be autonomous. And although not all companies push for this, I would argue the ones that don't are the ones that are going the way of the dinosaurs. I'm thinking things like Sears and Kmart. These are companies that have people that can see the problems but are simply not empowered, or they have not been given the space to speak on that. And basically things just go downhill from there, because although a lot of people saw it coming, none of them had the guts to speak up to management. And maybe if they did, management didn't listen, because they're the ones that make the decisions, not the people on the ground. Generally, it is better for the people on the ground to make the decisions. They have the most information, they are the most connected, and when it comes to things like autonomous teams, they are most in tune with one another as well. So at an individual level, the thing you need to know is that being autonomous, this feeling of I'm going to stake out on my own and I am going to make this decision, is a good thing. It is not just a good thing for you, it is a good thing for society. It can feel selfish, and oftentimes does, especially to people who have been kind of predisposed to believe that making your own decisions and doing something because you want to is being selfish, because you should be thinking about everybody else. What they fail to mention is that thinking about these larger things is too difficult and usually leads to a type of paralysis. So from there, let's get into how this can be a problem at a societal level. So I will say this before I go on, I am going to get into some things that may be considered political. I want to let you know that in no case am I saying that any decision made was incorrect. I'm simply saying in many cases that I would not have made that call. I don't question the right of governments to make calls, to make laws, to mandate things, or to restrict things. But I am maybe saying that I don't agree with the individual call that was made in some of these situations. So I'm going to use America as an example, and I'm going to use the vaccine as an example. Although it is very controversial, I think it is very relevant. Now, I am a person that I have not only gotten the vaccine, I've gotten the booster, and I have implored others to get the vaccine. As a friendly person trying to give them advice, of course, I am in no area or authority to force them to get it, nor would I want to. And I guess that would sort of be my point, that there is a cost when we do things like restrict things and when we do things like mandate things, and that cost is multifaceted. When you take away someone's autonomy, not everyone is the person that is already afraid to have their own autonomy. They may be somebody a little bit like me who has fought hard in their life to gain as much autonomy as possible. I love my parents, but I am glad that I don't live with them anymore, because even though they're good, smart people and make the best decisions they can, I prefer to make my own decisions about things. Now, obviously, like when you're living with your parents, this isn't always realistic. Sometimes they have to curtail your autonomy because it's just a practical problem. Like if you want to stay up all night listening to rock music, you could question whether or not this is a good thing for you. But they can't have it keeping them up all night because they are individual people too that also have autonomy and have things that they need to do. And this is sort of a similar thing that happens in governments, that we look at these situations that we have, like, COVID, for instance, and we have to decide when is it okay to curtail individuals' autonomy and when is it not? When is the damage going to be greater? And I personally think, especially lately, we haven't considered that enough. Because as we talked about in organizations, there's damage that's done when you curtail people's autonomy. You absolutely have the ability to, right? As a government or as the head of an organization, you have the ability to curtail people's autonomy. You have the ability to say, this is how we're doing it and I don't want it questioned. You have the ability to say, I am making these executive decisions and this is how we're going to move forward. And sometimes you have to. But I think when we're going to do that, we need to think about the downsides of doing it, because I think we've been a bit too heavy-handed with this. And I want to use vaccine mandates as an example. So I personally, if it were me running the government, and I'm glad it's not, because I'm not saying any of these decisions are easy. I'm not even saying that I'm right. I'm just saying that I think we probably should have gone in a different direction here. And that is to say, we have an issue with COVID in this country, but I think we have a much bigger issue with trust, within government, trust between the people and the government. And what happens when a government says, we are taking away your autonomy, we are going to tell you, this is what you're going to do, you don't have a choice, that erodes that trust even more than it already has been. Now, the US government probably has not done themselves any favors by things in the past where they have done different types of medical things to people without their consent, basically in a way not just removing their autonomy, but sort of doing it without telling them that they are. And that erodes trust. And so if you just erode trust and you don't make up for it in any way, that trust continues to erode. And it gets to the point where people will distrust you before you've even opened your mouth. And that's a lot of what I think has happened with the vaccine. That the government came out and said, we have a vaccine, we think everyone should take it. And many people did. In fact, the majority at this point have. But there were also large, sizable groups of people. I think it's, at this point, only 60% of people are vaccinated. I think it's actually more than that if you, don't say you have to have the booster to be vaccinated. But anyway, very sizable amount of the population has decided not to get vaccinated. And I think the reasoning for that is because they are already afraid of the government trying to take away their autonomy. And getting the vaccine is something that was scary. When I went and got it, I got it pretty early in. And I cannot tell you that when I was sitting in the car about to get it, that I was just, I was full on to get it. And I wasn't afraid of anything at all. I had the thoughts of, I wonder if I'm making a bad decision here. What if this hasn't been tested enough and there turns out to be some kind of side effect that comes from it? I had those doubts and I decided to go ahead and get it. But I understand how individuals might be a little bit less trustful than I am. And they go in the other direction where they seriously consider it and then they decide not to at that moment in time. Now, what makes this situation worse with people like this, that in my opinion are in an understandable situation, is several things. One is what we are doing where we're saying, okay, well, if you're going to decide not to get it, well, then I say you have to. That is not a good way to negotiate with people. That actually furthers these people's belief that there is something to be distrusted, because generally an entity that is trustworthy will not respond to disagreement with force. That's not something that a trustworthy person does. And you might be thinking of, you may have had experiences when you were a kid, and I have not had this experience, but I've seen the dads out there that the kid is like, I'm afraid to go do this type of practice. I don't want to go do this thing for the first time. And the parent basically says, well, I'm going to make you do it. And while this might not be a bad decision in the moment, in the long run, it erodes trust. It erodes, it basically creates a door or a barrier between that person and the person that removed their autonomy, because now there is this fear that that person has that this authority figure will remove their autonomy if they are not happy with the decision that your autonomy is taking. So again, it might be worth it to do it, but there is a cost that should be considered. And what we're doing that makes it even worse is when we then go and belittle people for making that autonomous decision that at this point they may have made in a purely rebellious manner. They see this figure, this authority figure, coming in and trying to remove that autonomy from them. And that may be autonomy they have fought for, that they are very defensive about, because in their lives from some authority figure has attempted to take it from them, and many have decided that they would rather die than lose it. And so when we move on from the threat of force to then belittling their decision, they tend to group with people that are feeling the same way. And now it's no longer really a discussion. It's more a us versus them thing. And it's people, especially in the case of the vaccine, where once you've made the decision, you can't really change your mind and go join the other side. You can't unget the vaccine. It becomes people that have made the decision and maybe don't understand why these other people are hesitant to, or ever were hesitant to. And then you have people on the other side that have, they were hesitant, and then they were pushed, and then they became rebellious. And to those people, a lot of times the facts aren't really what's important. It's really more about the fact that you're trying to take their autonomy from them. And had they just been left to make their own decision, had they thought about the vaccine and decided they didn't want to do it, and weren't belittled, and there were no threats of force, and we had just allowed them to continue to observe and given them the freedom to change their mind, they very well could have done that on their own and changed their mind on their own. But instead, an adversarial reaction was had when they made the decision that some of us didn't agree with, and that would also include the more authoritative figures did not agree with. I see my decision to get the vaccine as not something that I did because I was being forced to. I did it because I made the decision to do so, which makes me not very hostile towards the idea of getting it. But I might be hostile towards it had I had a moment where I wanted more time to think about it, or at the moment I even decided I wasn't going to do it. I could have come around after a while and then still made the decision, and it still would have been my decision and everybody would have been happy. But if I'm pushed and forced, that puts me in a position, or anyone in a position, where they kind of have to dig in because they feel like they have to protect their autonomy. And that's where you get a lot of this vaccine misinformation, honestly, is these people need ammunition to use in their fight for their own autonomy. And they're willing to take anything that they can get. And at that point, you've lost them. They have decided to join the other side. They are now not focused on what's best for themselves. They're not focused on what's best for society. They are focused more on protecting their own autonomy. And the more that people that are pro-vaccine, or authorities like the government that want them to get the vaccine for the better of everyone, try to push them at this point, the further dug in they are going to be. Because they are quite literally deciding to stand their ground. Think of locking your heel in the dirt to not be pushed. The further you push, the further they're going to be dug in. And in this case, there's just simply no way to push them past the line where they have the vaccine. There's no practical way anyway. And unfortunately, I think that a mistake we've made is we've taken that about as far as we can. Because at this point, we've mandated all employers over 100 people, require the vaccine in order for, them to have a business, basically. And the Supreme Court's about to overthrow that. So that may be as far as it has gone. Now, this is a really bad situation, and it makes a lot of things look bad. It makes the government, it makes authority here look really bad, because it's almost as though they lost their temper, yelled and yelled and yelled, finally decided they couldn't get their way and stormed out of the room. That's just not a good look. It would have been better had we never really pushed things in that way and decided to let these people come to their own conclusion. There's just a lot of examples out there where that has not been the case. And I would also say the people that made the decision, like me, have not done a good job with that. The idea of belittling these people for not going along with it, how is that helping anybody, would be my biggest question. Because one way to get someone to disagree with you more strongly than they previously did is to try to paint them as stupid, because that just makes them feel bad. But if they then admit that they did make the wrong decision and they want to go make the decision that you were vouching for, well, then they basically are then not only having to admit that they were wrong, but admit that they were stupid. And nobody I know is going to do that. And nobody headstrong enough to go against getting the vaccine is going to do that. So again, not an easy situation. COVID, not an easy situation. I think what we've done here, unfortunately, is we haven't really gotten more people to get the vaccine. We have dug people further into their stance that they shouldn't get the vaccine. Many of those people that may have not strongly believed that way in the first place. And then on top of that, we have eroded trust by showing that we are willing to try to throw our weight around to override their autonomy. And so many bad things come with those things. And so if you want to know what I think on what we need to do to get recover from that, I don't think there's any easy thing you can do aside from moving forward to not do those things and to try to regain and rebuild trust over time. This is sort of like when a family or a spouse, I should say a husband or wife or a couple have a fight and somebody in there tries to throw their weight around and acts irrationally. The only way to recover from that, really, is to apologize, and maybe we could do that, but I don't see it happening, and then to try to do better in the future. So, again, I could totally be wrong here. Maybe we made the best decision we could, but I don't really think that we have. And I'm not saying I am no less pro-vaccine than I have ever been. I'm still very pro-vaccine. I still recommend everybody get the vaccine. But I think the way we've been trying to push people to get it has been counterproductive for us, for society, and especially for those people. So, sorry guys, I know this got a little bit dark, and I know it went a little bit long. If you disagree with me, feel free to post in the comments why you do, and have a good night.